Aloha. Thank you for watching The Fontaine Factor. My name is Representative George Fontaine. I represent South Maui. And tonight we're going to have a discussion about charter schools. What are they? Where are they going in the future? And how you as a community can get involved and help. My guest this evening, very distinguished guests. We have with us Lynn Finnegan, who's the Executive Director of Hawaii Public Charter Schools Network. Welcome, Lynn.
Aloha.
And we have Representative Ling Johanson, who represents the, which is your area now?
Honolulu through area.
Yeah, the whole area. So, thank you, Aaron, for joining me.
Good to be here.
Aaron actually serves with me on the Education Committee, so we had an opportunity to get involved in some legislation this past session dealing with charter schools. So let's take this up from the 30,000-foot level and actually discuss what exactly is a charter school, Lynn. And maybe we can just go back from its origins, from its very beginning. When was it first started, where, and how did it make its way to Hawaii?
In the early 90s in Minnesota, there was a bunch of reform type minded educators that came forth and said we wanted to do school differently. And so they started lobbying for this idea that would be a charter school, a public charter school where you wouldn't charge tuition and where the school level staff would have more control of what was going on at the school level, because they felt that there were, too many things dragging them in different directions, that they couldn't really do their job to answer to the needs of the student. And so, this whole idea across the nation was these student-focused schools, and that's where it all began. There was a real pushback in Minnesota to change things, and they developed these charter schools. About the mid-90s is when we in Hawaii, we started thinking about how might we be able to have an idea like these kinds of charter schools here in Hawaii, and they developed what is called student-centered schools in Hawaii. And they weren't charter schools per se at the time, but there were two schools that did that, and that fell under that, and they were what is considered conversion charter schools now. That was Waialae and Lanikai.
So that's a public school that then converted into this format, or?
Right. All charter schools are public schools. However, the traditional DOE type schools, there were two, Lanikai and Waialae here on Oahu, and they requested to be these student-centered schools and they're called conversion charter schools today. In the early 1999, 2000, and then 2000, 2001, our first charter schools that are called startup charter schools. This is where they don't have access to facilities right off the bat. They're given a per pupil amount, but they're not converting from a DOE traditional school into a charter school. They're just, they submitted their application to become a charter school. They were given their charter, and then they started in a new school.
Okay, so back in the mid-90s, this all began in Minnesota. I imagine there must have been a lot of pushback from like unions and other folks that just didn't want to see the public education system, changing. Mm-hmm. Nobody likes new things, right? I mean, everybody likes to stick in the mud, stay the course. So how did they get the momentum to do that?
Well, it was actually, there were a couple legislators that stood up and said that we're going to work with the union to start these charter schools in Minnesota. But it was really a push from educators. Educators wanted to see, educators or teacher-led schools, and you started to see that in the charter schools in the initial movement. And then it started to spread throughout the country. So it was really a collaborative effort right from the beginning.
With parents and everyone?
With parents, and more lately across the nation, you started to see the contention between even teachers. Some teachers do want to head in this direction, some teachers don't. Some community members do and don't. And so you see things like Waiting for Superman, that kind of documentary that was out.
Right.
But there are very successful models of conversion charter schools that aren't necessarily contentious.
Right.
And then, of course, there are some.
Right.
So the hope is that everyone wants to be, student-centered, that they want to do what's best for the child, and at times you will have an opportunity to do so under the charter school law.
So here in Hawaii, when we started looking at this and looking at legislation, it was the same type of thing, where we had folks that basically stepped up and say, hey, we've learned about this program that's going on in the mainland and we want to see if it can work here in Hawaii?
I believe so, and you know, the principals and educators, and they had to do. Let me just explain it this way: in Hawaii, it's done a little differently, where our charter schools are mandated to be a part of the collective bargaining. So all charter schools are mandated to be a part of collective bargaining, and they are state employees. And that was negotiated when the first charter school law was approved and passed into law. Across the nation, you don't have that. Some opt in, and they have the option to be in collective bargaining, and others aren't at all in collective bargaining. So that's a difference between Hawaii and the rest of the nation.
Okay. Aaron, on your experience this past, you've just finished your first term here. You've been a real advocate for education. You know, all of us are really proud of all the efforts that you've been putting into developing or improving education here in Hawaii and looking at legislation and ways to improve it. What was your take on some of the bills that came through and your thoughts about this session and in regards to charter schools, but also you can add in some your thoughts on education as well?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of exciting things that happened this session and a lot of accomplishments. I think what I'm most proud of for the education committee as well as the education community, because I think it does directly impact our children, is that there's always a real, genuine, frank conversation that goes on, as you all know, when we're in the education committee, and there's a real wrestling with the issues. I think the committee is often on the vanguard of really trying to look at how do we improve things, you know, how do we retool, and how do we be open to new ideas. And I see that both on the Senate and the House side. So it's an incredible experience to be a part of, to be a member of that kind of committee that is continually retooling and assessing, particularly with respect to charter schools. What was interesting is, based on the work done by Chair Takuda and Vice Chair Belatti over the interim of 2011, there were a lot of recommendations specifically about charter schools through a task force about what does the future of charter schools look like. And I think the two of them did a lot of incredible work there, along with the rest of the task force, in setting up a framework for this 2012 legislative session to dialogue about how do we better support charter schools, how do we recognize public charter schools in the context of the entire education continuum, how do we ensure the same level of support as well as accountability measures. And I think that's a great next step in this ongoing journey of how do we improve education, you know, just to continue to look at those things. And so I really do think there was a lot of work that went in this past session. I think, like all things, it's a work in progress, and we'll probably spend many successive legislative sessions you know, trying to continue to improve and retool, but there was a lot of focus this past session, particularly on charter schools.
Now, Lynn, how many charter schools are there in Hawaii?
With the addition of our new charter school, which is a conversion charter school in Lapahoehoe, we have 32 charter schools in Hawaii.
And so are they all basically run the same way, or are they run differently depending upon whatever the particular need is in that community, or how does it work?
Well, what happens is, the way I like to explain charter schools are mission driven. So what that means is either community or some educators will take a look at what is needed and how they might want to innovate education in their community and come to the table. They'll come to the table with this plan, and they apply to become a charter and are approved whether or not that plan is a good plan. So these charters have every kind of focus, from being a Hawaiian-focused charter school, which are Hawaiian language immersion or Hawaiian-focused culture, place-based type education. And we have science and ocean studies type focuses. We have STEM, and we have online focus type of schools. There's a variety of all kinds of wonderful programs, project-based learning, you know, all of those things that are in our different charter schools.
Now, is the cost the same in terms of having a student go to a charter school, or I realize they don't pay tuition,
Right.
but I mean, you had mentioned earlier that there was I guess a reimbursement by DOE per pupil, right?
Yeah, the way that it works is the whole education budget, there's a portion of that budget that gives a per pupil amount to
Right.
charter schools. So on the other hand, you might have what's called the weighted student formula, and I don't want to go too much into the detail, but you might have the weighted student formula along with other funding that goes to support the traditional DOE side of education. And then there's a pot of money for charter schools, and that pot of money gets dispersed per pupil. This year it's about 6,000 is the kind of support that the charter schools are getting. And you know, there's all kinds of other buckets of money, and historically speaking, you know, the charter schools have always had an issue with the equity in funding. And we've noticed, and we have some studies that was done along with the Department of Education stating where the major discrepancies are in distribution of funds. And some of those areas are places like federal funds, and some of those areas, and another place or area is with facilities funding. And those are probably the two biggest areas where there's inequity.
Folks, if you're just joining us, my name is Representative George Fontaine, and you're watching the Fontaine Factor. With us this evening is Lynn Finnegan, who's the director for the, I get your title always messed up here, I have to read it, Executive Director for the Hawaii Public Charter Schools Network,
Yes.
and Representative Ling Johanson from the, I keep wanting to sing Mauna Lua, but it's...
That's where I'm from.
Yeah, okay, all right.
That's A, please.
And we're talking about charter schools this evening. Lynn, getting back to what we were just discussing about the funding issue, you know,
Yes.
having made several visits and actually personally knowing the principal of the Kiei Charter School, which, by the way, if you've never met Gene Zaro or visited the Kiei High School, if you're on the island of Maui, it's definitely worth a trip down there to see what the remarkable work that man is doing with the school. But one of the things that concerns me is that he's actually paying rent for his facility. He doesn't actually have a school that's a DOE building. He's actually renting out commercial space in one location, which is got a laundromat next to it, and and a Mexican restaurant and a bar. You know, and it's very odd to see that right in the middle of the shopping complex there's this school, and that's the middle school, and then the high school is located at a different campus, which is actually in a light industrial park. So you have like equipment manufacturing and all this, and then plumb in the middle of it is this high school, and he makes it work. You know, he has been very innovative in doing things to making the program a success. I had an opportunity, Aaron had an opportunity actually to visit that school and see some of the work that they were doing in robotics, but it just doesn't seem fair. It's like, I think he mentioned that he gets like $8,000, something like that per student, whereas a DOE student that's not in a charter school is actually getting more money allocated to that student. So I think they're getting somewhere, and please correct me if I'm wrong with these numbers, but I believed it was somewhere around like 14,000 to educate a public school child, but yet the charter school was only getting like 8,000 something for a charter school. Now, a regular public school, they don't have to pay rent because they're in a state building. So I just find that very odd that now its onus is on him. He's got to pay an electric bill, and I think his electric bill, he said, I think was like something like $25,000 a month or something, and it's very expensive on Maui. I mean, how
does that work?
Yeah, how does that work? Yeah, you know, I mean, we need to. I think we really got to fix that.
Right, right. You know, the bottom line is our charter schools are delivering on the promise for innovative education, and we need to support that. In our Constitution, under education, it states that the state is obligated by the Constitution to provide facilities of its educational, you know, of its education. So, you know, that's a very important issue, and when you get the operating money only, and you know, we can talk about federal funding, but I'll put that on the side for now. When you're only talking about the equal operating money, what happens is you're taking that operating money and you're taking a sliver of 10, 20, 30% in some cases, and you're using that for your facilities. So we're already, you know, the charter schools are already down 10, 15, 20%, 30% at times in operating their facilities. And that takes a huge chunk out of what they're able to do in the classroom. What I have observed, though, as I visited all of these schools, is you'll see some schools have run down buildings that they have to either rent or lease, but the education is amazing at these schools. So what we hope is that if we can get that kind of equity and funding, especially in support of facilities, you'll start to see even the bigger possibilities coming from these charter schools. It's definitely a hindrance. Take, for example, you have Voyager that's right down the hall, not the hall, but right down the way from the Capitol. Their mission is to serve parents in the community in the downtown area, and they have these methodologies in how they're going to do that. Wonderful school. They're one of the schools that's doing very well amongst many of them. But the problem remains that their single most expensive burden is on the facilities that they have.
Yeah.
And that's like that for everyone. We have WEA that's coming across some problems right now where they have to move their site. WEA is West Hawaii Explorations Academy. They have a beautiful program in Maui right next to the airport, and they're being forced to move from where they're at to another location, and that's going to take money to be able to do that.
Right.
Fortunately, there are some talks in the making to try and support charter schools, but we're a long way away from getting some facility support.
Well, one of the things that what I learned, folks, about charter schools was that not every student is meant to go to a charter school because of the fact that, as you explained, charter schools can have a particular focus, whether it be STEM or whatever the case may be, and some kids don't learn well when they're in a more independent environment, depending upon how the teaching methodology is. I know from an experience that I had an exchange student a couple of years ago who had enrolled in the Kihei High School, our charter school, and she didn't like it because it was too small. She wanted to be in a bigger school where she could meet a lot of people and make a lot of friends, and so it didn't work for her. But then yet I know kids that are going there now or have graduated and had a fantastic experience and are doing very, very well in pursuing science and careers and all of these other things. So, it's something worth to definitely check out for those folks that have young children that are looking at alternatives to education aside from the traditional, public school setting. They seem to really provide a good need. And it's not for everybody, but they provide a need.
I think that's the best way for everybody to be able to appreciate everybody who is a part of the education community, that there are traditional public schools who really are meeting people's needs. I'm a proud product of the Moanalua Public Schools, and it really met my needs. In fact, it surpassed more than I ever could have imagined. But some people do better in a smaller private setting. Some people do better in a smaller public setting where there's more either individualized attention or there might be a little more flexibility in crafting what their educational curriculum may look like. And I think that's an excellent way to describe just all of Hawaii's education community, that in working together they're providing a strong continuum and array of options for all of Hawaii's children.
Well, I know when I came out and I visited your district, your school, which intermediate school was that? It was
IAA Intermediate.
Yeah, the IAA Intermediate. I mean, there's a public school that they were able to turn around. This principal is just phenomenal. And he turned around that school in like a 5-year period of time. It was like, thuggery was going on there. I mean, it was horrible. And now it's like this fantastic school. I mean, you walk onto the campus, it's like a college campus. It's completely equipped. And he decided that, he was going to chuck the textbooks and he was going to go completely into an online kind of learning experience. And he really broke a lot of new ground. And as a result, the school is really accelerating. So even though it may not be in a charter school aspect where we can do these things, I think aspects of charter schools can be developed if you have the staff and the principal and everybody who's willing to toe that line and do it.
Well, I'd like to even say, you know, who knows where the connection happened for some of these things that are innovative happening at the traditional school level? Because, you know, our schools have been around for, you know, more than a decade now, and it's very possible that through the groundbreaking that has been happening in the charter schools in Hawaii, that there's room for online learning in traditional schools. There's room for hands-on project-based learning in traditional schools. There's room for agriculture programs and, you know, renewable energy in schools. Hawaii, especially, you know, we've got a lot to tout about. You have schools that are all off. There are schools that are off the grid. There are schools that have all kinds of, you know, renewable energy at these charter schools. That they have agriculture programs from seed to table. Things that are so progressive in the things that we as a community and a state have felt has been important to the state for a very long time. And they take these little innovative, you know, charters and they move these things forward. And you may not even notice it, but then it starts to affect like how we see education and can we see education differently.
Well, I think that's the case. And of course, it's so, you know, it's such a huge beast. I don't, maybe a beast isn't the right word, but you know, with the Department of Education looking at its size and its complexity of what it is, you know, there seemed to be in the past there was pushback from trying to do anything different, you know, and I see now that the slack's being let off a bit, where we're starting to see some progressive thinking. I know that I went to the Hawaii P20 Initiative conference. They had a presentation about what they're doing with that. But I also had an opportunity to visit this, and it was featured in that Superman movie about the school called Prius, which is in San Diego. That's a charter school that only allows inner city kids whose parents have never had a college education. So they couldn't discriminate based upon race, but the requirement is to go to that school. You have to have, none of your parents have any college background, because they find that kids that come from families that have no college background are least likely to go on to pursue a college career. So what they do is they bring these kids in, they bust them in, and they actually have a longer school day. It's like almost a 10-hour day. And so what ends up happening, they start at grade 6 and they go all the way through high school, and at the end of the day, they actually get 1 year extra education. And 94% of those kids end up going to a 4-year university. And they have this charter school right on the campus of University of San Diego. So there's interaction with college kids as well too. And I thought, my gosh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do a program like that here, where we could get kids that come from families, maybe immigrant families that have no college. Because how does mom and dad tell their kids to go to college or tell them how to apply? And you know, you can't, they have no concept of it. All they know is going to work every day, you know. So I wanted to touch on one base, and I think we want to talk to you about Act 130, but I think, Lynn, didn't you have some photos that you wanted to share with folks today?
Sure, that would be great. You know, we have a photo here from Kanai-Kapono over on Kauai, and they have a Hawaiian-focused program, a lot to do with place-based learning. And here, an older student is mentoring and teaching a younger student, and you'll find a lot of that happening in their education models throughout some of the charter schools, where, you know, it's responsibility towards others' learning, and so they work as a family to make sure that kids are learning from multiple ways. Okay. And that's another thing about charter schools. It's about hands-on, it's about all of these different ways that you might be able to learn and meeting those children's needs.
Let's put up the other ones, because we're running short on time here.
Online learning. Online learning is in quite a few of our schools, and the programs are successful. And this is basically, you know, just showing that you can bring your computer just about anywhere and do online learning. The next one is, as I mentioned, we have a lot of Hawaiian immersion, Hawaiian culture-focused, place-based learning. A lot of our schools, maybe a little less than half, are Hawaiian culture-focused schools. And, you know, as I mentioned, I think we don't say enough about the successes of our charter schools. Some have national recognition for, you know, science and all kinds of wonderful things. So I hope that there's going to be more opportunity to talk about that.
Now, we're running a little short of time, Aaron, but I did want to just briefly touch upon Act 130 that passed this year, which is basically going to give some oversight now as a commission with the charter schools. Lynn,
Yes.
is this a good thing? You think this ultimately is going to provide more accountability in our charter schools and making sure that they're all doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Well, what I'd like to bring up is, of course there's public accountability when you receive public money, but there's also this whole idea of charter schools in the first place. And when you're in Hawaii, where there's only one governance model, which is the BOE-DOE, when you have a mission-oriented type charter school sector, sometimes it's not easy to understand what they're about, and you try to fit them in the box of the DOE-BOE. What this legislation does is it clarifies some roles, uses some national best practices, and allows us to move forward in implementing a law and policies that will work to preserve some innovation but have public accountability.
Terrific. Now, Lynn, if anybody out there, our viewers, have any questions, further questions about the charter schools or wants to get information about charter schools in their particular area, what would be the best place for them to catch you or write to you?
We're online at hawaiicharterschools.com. So Hawaii Charter Schools,
Okay.
plural, with an S.
I think we have your website.
.com. There you go. Nice and bright and friendly look
Okay.
there. And we have things where you can sign up for Facebook and Twitter. We do updates. We have a little public service announcement about the satisfaction of our students and how they enjoy the programs. And especially if you're looking to place a child in a charter school, you can find charter schools and their descriptions and stuff on our website.
And there's no charge to apply.
That's right. No charge to apply or attend. And as long as there's openings in the right grades and such,
I know, my son went on a waiting list. He never made it, but that's okay.
Sorry,
yeah.
support charter schools and let's
No,
expand.
we do, and we need to do more. I want to thank both of you for coming in today. I know you folks are very busy. It's a busy time of year, and especially you, Lynn, you're all over the place trying to manage all these 32 schools.
Or help,
Yeah.
support, yes.
But really,
Thank you for having us.
really appreciate you folks coming in, and we'll do this again. I think we need to do more and get in more, maybe the minutia of the charter schools. I really want to talk more about that. Thanks again for watching, folks. Again, this is the Fontaine Factor, and if you need to reach me, you can call my office at 586-8525 or email me at repfontaine@capital.hawaii.gov. That's repfontaine@capital.hawaii.gov. Thank you for watching.